Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 9:37 on a Thursday Thursday morning. Hope everyone's doing good. I've been back to somewhat of a normal schedule here at Film Fanatic headquarters. So I've been pretty much watching movie a night and doing a post. I got a bunch of movies pretty recently, which has been really awesome. I go to Opera House Video once a month, twice a month to stay up on new releases and new movies. So I did a bunch of shows on those, and then went to the movies also this past weekend. Saw a really great film called Weapons. That was a big surprise. That was very cool. Did a show on that, so check that out. Check out that movie too if you get a chance. It's gonna be I'm sure it's still in the theater. It's been out for 2 weeks, going on 3 weeks this coming weekend. Very cool movie. And in the meantime, I've been slowly watching the stack of movies that I got. I accumulated about probably about 5 or 6 new movies, or actually more, over the last couple of months. Brand new purchases on my end from the great Bull Moose. So very cool. So I got a few more movies to cover in regards to all of those things. One of the shows I'm thinking about doing, I'm gonna probably do a show where I'm going to do like a show all about slasher movies. I did a big show last year on slasher movies. Slashers are my favorite subgenre in the world of exploitation, if you want to call it a subgenre. That's my bread and butter. Like that's my thing that I always go to. It's my favorite genre, and so I have this thing of where if I come across virtually any slasher film, I will buy it. I don't typically buy there. I mean, there are exceptions, but one big exception, which is a movie I've talked a lot about, In a Violent Nature, which was a movie that came out last year in 2024. Such an awesome movie, one of the best modern day slasher films. But and there's been a slew of others, but I haven't been really, honestly, really impressed with a lot of the new slasher films. But I have gotten quite a few other slasher films as of late. I typically, when I go to Blue Moose, I usually have a little bit of a cutoff time as far as, or cutoff year, I should say, or decade. Usually, like, I don't buy too many movies in the 90s. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of horror films, especially slasher films in the 90s. I kind of feel like they're all, generally, there are some good ones, but generally, I feel like, at the end of the 80s, mid to late 80s, the slasher craze, because it was a kind of a phenomenon. It was so huge. It kind of came to an end, and it's, for all intents and purposes, it's been still, I mean, it's still a massive genre, and they're still making new, modern contemporary slashers. But the problem that I always have with a lot of the newer slasher films, and I talked about these two movies, the most recent releases that I got was, that I saw were Heart Eyes, and then also Hell of a Summer. Those were two very modern releases that came out, I believe, this year, that were slasher movies. And I generally, the problem that I always have with newer slasher movies is that I think they're too slick. I think the cast, usually the actors and the cast that they always assemble for a lot of the newer films, well, they just look too damn pretty. They don't look like normal young people or teenagers. I feel like they're kind of glossy, very slick. They have a very slick production to them, and I feel like the kills are some kills are decent, but I feel like they are I think, well, when it comes to practical effects, I think things always come full circle. We're seeing more of that now in horror films. But I think that they just don't strike that chord for the most part. There's a lot more cutaways, and I think that's, things are implied a little bit more. They don't really show practical effects or kills as much as they used to. They just don't have that impact. And the old school slashers, which I'm all about, they are just, they're brutal, they're fun, they have a certain kind of grit to them. They're kind of sleazy, they're dirty, they're really raw, they're really low budget. They don't have a high production value, but the directors are usually able to turn whatever money they have into gold and really put it on the big screen. There's more of a use, an abundance of imagination. So today's show's on a new slasher film that, well, I should say it's from 1989, and it's an Australian horror slasher exploitation movie, and it was put out by Severn. And this movie is simply amazing. I again never heard of this movie. I bought it about 2 weeks ago, just about 2 weeks ago. I was at Bull Moose, and this release is absolutely incredible. It was put out by Severn. Came out in 1989. It was directed by Alec Mills, and again, it's like it's right. This came out right at the end. I think, like, if you're looking at the slasher genre, like, historically, this came out right at the end of kind of when the whole genre kind of died for a while, and then it came back in the 90s, and of course it came back, and the whole genre of horror came back because it did die a slow death. And I've said this before, but I really do attribute the reinterest, the rekindling of that flame for horror was really when Wes Craven directed Scream, the first one. That was a phenomenon. That brought people back to the theaters to see horror films and also slasher films. I do really love that movie. And I know I did a show on that. But I would say when this came out in 1989, like, that is, pretty much when I feel like kind of the old school slasher genre was kind of coming to an end. It was massively popular because of, well, Halloween, of course, and especially the Friday 13th franchise. That's kind of when, everybody and their grandmother was making a slasher movie. Tom Savini, the iconic effects man, did virtually every slasher movie that was coming out at that time. And you have that period of the 70s through the 80s where it was just on fucking fire, really. The slasher genre was so massive. And there's something to really be, something to be said about that because, things come and go, trends come and go. And then, but every now and then there's a few movies that come along and just, they're kind of trailblazers, or they just change the scope of what is happening. And the Friday 13th franchise really did that. Black Christmas, which I've talked about, probably the most important and the most iconic slasher film ever made. Sergio Martino's Torso, which is even older, which is a giallo film, but I consider that to be a slasher film, which came before. Came before Black Christmas. So the origins of slasher films go way, way back. But I have to say, '89 is like kind of the cutoff. But this is such an awesome movie. It's kind of a murder mystery, not quite a giallo film, but it is super amazing, and the kills are really great. It's centered on these mysterious kills that are taking place at this high school. These girls are being murdered, and the big reveal of who the killer is really, really awesome. A big, like, really, it's such a great payoff. And one of the things that's so great about this movie is, the plot reveal. When they finally reveal who the killer is, you kind of don't see it coming. At least I didn't, and it's a big surprise. It's legitimately unsettling. It also gets into kind of this psychosexual thing of where there's some kind of perverted form of sex that is included, or some warped individual's mind of how he really perceives sex and murder and death. And that's a component too of a lot of slasher films, and you see it in a lot of giallo films, psychosexual elements. And that is a big part of this movie, Blood Moon. It's an Australian movie. Australia was a pretty amazing you know country that was putting out all kinds of amazing films in the 70s and 80s. Just amazing. And there's one movie of their another Australian movie that I can think of, Razorback, which was an awesome, kind of more or less, kind of a monster film, but more of a horror film. But a whole slew of really great Australian movies came out during this time. But I really think historically this is like kind of where the slasher genre kind of came to an end. And it's really gritty. It's super sleazy. Again, it's 89, so it's very close. There were so many slasher films that came out during the 80s, like starting from like 80 to about 89. And I have this habit now where if I come across a slasher film, you know, especially if it's from the 80s, I won't really, like, again, I don't really go too far into the 90s, but anything in the 80s, 70s, obviously, and before that, but definitely any 70s film, any 80s film, especially if it's a slasher film, I will get it no matter what. It's, and I think this is a movie I never heard about before. This was put out by Severin, and Severin is just, I'm at a point now where I've bought a ton of Severin titles, and virtually the majority of the Severin titles that I've bought are all movies I've never seen before. So they were all like, it's all been first time viewing and first time experiences. And every movie I've gotten from them has just been top notch, top shelf. Severin just knocks it out of the park. So yeah, I can't recommend Blood Moon enough. It's got everything that you want from that, prime time decade of the slasher genre. It's just amazing. So again, I can't, and I have tons and tons of titles, and this has happened a lot with a lot of the boutique labels. Yeah, they just knock it out of the park, and I've gotten so many amazing movies over the past few years. I've been turned on to so many cool directors. I've been turned on to so many movies, and then also I have, I saw a lot of slasher movies, obviously, and a lot of real low budget horror exploitation movies when I was a kid. So I've gotten to kind of, from a nostalgic perspective, I've, kind of revisited a lot of movies of my youth that I bought on Blu-ray. And again, it's always that experience because of the quality of some of these movies, or really all of these movies. It's, it's like seeing it for the first time. And I've also just had that experience, where it's just opened up all of these doors to discovering, just amazing films like this that are super obscure, I've never heard about, and then, leading me into discovering new directors. So just amazing. But this is one of the best slasher movies I've seen in a long time. Super gritty. It's super raw. Amazing kills. Really great story. Great cast. It's they don't make slasher movies like this. I think it's safe to say they don't make movies like this. The only exception that I can really think of, in fairly recent time, is In a Violent Nature, which I really love that movie, and that movie really delivers the goods. But great film, Blood Moon, 1989. Another fabulous Severin release that just came out. I think they just put this out, and they crank out movies all the time. So, thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.